Hi. So this week I'm going to be doing the homework from Penelope Dullaghan's class in expressing. And she taught us several different techniques, and I'm going to try and use all or some of them at least in creating some new images based on her assignment, which was to do something about flight. And at the core, I think, of what Penelope was talking about was the idea that your lines, your shapes, your colors, your textures have an expressive function as well as a representational one. They're not just there to make things look like they really do in nature, but they're to capture the kind of the inner feelings of what you have. And you know, this is something I think about quite a lot because we have all these tools right now that allow us to capture anything with absolute accuracy, and that's cameras. And we all carry cameras with us all the time now in our mobile phones. So, you know, how can we go beyond that to capture something deeper? And one of the artists who I refer to a lot and who I like a lot is an artist who dealt with this issue of what do we do in an age where we can mechanically reproduce any image using printing techniques, photographic techniques, computer techniques, digital imaging. How do we still, as artists, add something new? And Andy Warhol struggled with that or confronted that throughout his career, but it began when he was an illustrator, and he was really one of the top illustrators in New York in the 50s before he began creating his fine art and inventing pop art. And one of the things that I love about his work is that his line is always flawed and human. And he also uses a lot of techniques that come from the world of printmaking, of newspaper ad reproduction, the way that packaging uses screen printing to do multiple images, and how when we think about mass production in image making, we tend to think of a certain degree of perfection, that every image is going to be the same. And what Andy Warhol did really was to say, no, each image is an image in and of itself, and it has its own flaws, its own particularities. And that, I think, is what, you know, saves us in a way from living in a world where everything is just a clone of everything else. That there's still room for the organic and for the human. And so Andy's lines were always flawed. His registration was off. His brushwork, his pen work were frail in some way. And I really like that. There are many artists that I like for that same reason, but he uses mechanical techniques in a way that I think are really interesting. And that is, in a way, what Penelope is talking about as well. She's talking about how we can combine textures and screen printing techniques and rubber stamp making techniques, transfers, all these different things, combine them to use to create organic shapes and lines, and also combine them again in the computer and create kind of perfect images out of flawed elements. And that's how we can avoid just living in a world of perfect illustrations created by Illustrator, a most ironically named application where everything can be kind of reduced to a series of digits. So with all that in mind and thinking about expressiveness, let's tackle our project. So first of all, subject matter. I thought about, there's a scene in this movie that I really like, which is about the life of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And in it, David Bowie plays Andy Warhol. And there's a scene where Andy and Jean-Michel are working together on this gigantic mural of these Pegasus images from mobile gas signs. And that's an image that Andy did a number of different times. And so I thought I would take that Pegasus and I would use that as the basis for my art piece. Here's my little drawing of Pegasus based on that mobile sign. Instead of using rolls of acetate, I bought a pad of it. So they're individual sheets that are pre-cut, and they're nice and flat, so they lay flat. Don't have to worry about them quite the way I might if they were in a roll. Now I just draw the outline with a Sharpie. And then next I'm going to take a little bit of a risk, because now that I have my outline, I need to cut it out. And instead of using an X-Acto knife, I'm going to go a bit nuts and use a scalpel. First, a fresh blade to make the sharpest. Now, as you know, I am accident prone, and this is probably the most terrifying thing that I did all week. But I managed to change the blade without incident, without hemorrhage, and now I just cut out the edges, the surround. I managed to slice his nose off, so I put a bit of tape there to fix it up, and then pop out the negative shape. Oh, I have a whole box of stamp pads, and I found that as I've been experimenting with these, that in fact many brands do not work well. The color box is terrible, but these Studio G ones are pretty nice, and they're basically, I think, a different brand but the same version as Penny talks about. They're nice and juicy, and so I'm just stamping all over the stencil with a couple of different colors to get a nice sort of rich color, but it has some sort of textural elements to it. And now I tape down my drawing, open the ink bottle, and as she suggests, I use a thin watercolor brush, and I put just a little bit of ink there on one edge, fold it over, press it down with my finger, and then pull it back for the moment of truth, and yes, it's transferred there, but you can see it's a little spotty. It's not great, so I decided to switch to a dip pen, which has a big fat Japanese blade, and then, oh no, this is an utter disaster. As you can see, too much ink, and it's really made a mess. I'm trying to clean it up with some paper towel, but this is a nightmare. Oh no, look, I just did it again on the stomach. Yikes. Great. So, there it is. A shaggy, horrible looking Pegasus. Go back to the brush just to try something out, and you know what? Actually, with the brush, I'm getting that line quality that I want. So, you know what? I'm going to give up this whole thing. I've learned a couple lessons. Do not use a dip pen, and parenthetically, do not use a dip pen while wearing a white sweater. All right, let's try again. The great thing about having a stencil is you can do it again. And I've actually made a cleaner, neater little Pegasus here. Tape down my tissue again, and this time I'm careful to use a brush, learn my lesson, and the lines are working much nicer. I'm not going to show you the whole process, but I'm just, I've done it here, and it worked well. And I managed to get that kind of look that looks like old-fashioned screen printing. And here's a little quote from Andy: "Art is what you can get away with." All right, let's move on to the next assignment. So, took a little drawing I did of myself and threw, again, some acetate on it. I'm going to make another little stencil out of this. So, at first I just traced around it, and I want to just get the skin tone. So I also am going to avoid the eyes. I'll show you why in a second. So there it is. This is my little stencil. And again, I take my ink pads and I do a little printing. And there we go. There's my face. Next, I have carved another drawing. I've carved myself a little wood cut, actually, using that lino quality stuff that Penny talks about. And I just used the ink pad and printed it, and ba-boom, there it is. And now I'm going to just cover my face again and just do the little background. So there you have it. And now I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to start with the black. So first I put down a line, and now I register it with that stencil. So it's just a different way of doing it, slightly more controlled. And then again the background. So that's it. 2 little prints and my Pegasus. Homework done. It was interesting doing some projects like that. In other words, they weren't just drawing exercises, but they were sort of more craftsy, if you will. And I think learning a technique like that is really gratifying initially because you're doing something new. But of course, getting it to work well takes time. And I really like this technique. I like the stencil effect. I like making these little prints. It's not something I'd really thought about doing before, but I also can see that I'm going to have to work hard at it. I'm going to have to overcome my natural sloppiness and poor planning. And I'm going to have to kind of keep doing it to get the effects that I want. But I really like this issue of mechanical reproduction as a way of making expressive images. I've always liked children's book illustrations, and they remind me of my own childhood, and there's a lot of emotion in them. So I've often, with watercolors, simulated this kind of off-registration, cheap printing look. But now, thanks to Penelope's class, I can see more like how to more literally do it. And thinking about Andy Warhol, realizing this has the potential to be a truly artistic form of expression that is emotional, that has deeper layers of meaning that are kind of nonverbal. So it's definitely worth the effort to me to get good at this. It's also something that I can do in my sketchbook. It's something I can do on a sketchbook page and give it that look of a printed page, which is really interesting, and I like that too because I love books, love illustrations in books, and this is just another way of doing it. So I've had a lot of fun this week, and I look forward to whatever's going to come up next week. See you then.